Welcome to CFC. Today we're joined by Peter Muhoro, who's the Chief Science, Technology, and Innovation Officer at Rappahannock. Is that right?
Strategy. Well, I'm glad you gave me a new
Chief
title.
Strategy
I am a
Officer.
scientist by training, so I'll take that anytime.
Okay, so Chief Strategy, Technology, and Innovation Officer.
Yes, sir.
All right, and Jan Ahlen, my colleague, who's the Vice President of Utility Research. Jan, Peter, thank you for joining. Today we are going to focus on the future. So some of what we say will be out there 10, 15, maybe 20 years. So keep in mind, we're not talking current trends. You may disagree with a few things said today. So Peter, I want to start with you. Give us a feel for a distribution co-op 15, 20 years from now, just general big changes that you think might occur.
Well, sure. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you to CFC for having me to discuss this topic. As many folks who know me, I like to think out in the future and think about, where will we be when I think of from a strategy standpoint. And really what I look at, I can back up a little bit. Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, headquartered in Fredericksburg, Virginia. We serve about parts of 22 counties, 180,000, almost 180,000 meters. What makes it unique is we also have 18,000 miles of line. So we do have both urban areas and very rural areas with a density of about 10 meters to a mile. So when I look at my system, I pretty much have covered what you think of urban co-op and all the way to a rural co-op. And so when I look at where I ask myself, where are we going to be in the future? A lot of it is going to be driven with newer technologies that we have to adapt to. And those technologies will not be anything like we've always had before, right? In fact, one common terminology here at utilities, dumb old utility guys, we've always done it this way, right? We have to think a little bit different, right? And so where do I see the future of the distribution cooperative? A couple of things I'm going to highlight is that I believe distribution cooperatives will get to the point where their perspective on electrons and delivering electrons looks very different. And if anything, it's more of the managing electrons, and we could get into that conversation a little bit as we go through this, and how you manage who gets, how the power goes at what given time, and not just a one blanket fits all kind of mindset. Secondly, I believe technologies such as artificial intelligence, virtual reality, things such as ChatGPT will be an integral part of what we do with our business. The automation will be a key piece of where we go from a technology standpoint.
And do you think co-ops will secure that automation as part of a package from a vendor? It'll be embedded in what they buy in the future? Is that your vision?
Absolutely. I believe that at some point, even downline devices will have those things embedded in them. So there's no question about that I think that's part of the package. Thirdly, I do think our business models will have to look very different. The traditional electric cooperative business model has worked well, and I should say the traditional utility business model has worked well for over 100 years and served us well, but the reality of it is what the consumer needs today versus what they needed even 5 or 10 years ago looks very different. So we have to adapt to where we meet our consumers with a whole different type of business model, and I'm sure we could get into it. And then lastly, the big piece of it is the workforce is going to look very different. And I think the combination of those 4 things is what begins to structure what the future of a distribution co-op looks like.
That's interesting. And the one that, when you mentioned the business model, a few years back, it might be more than a few years, I had a high-level venture capitalist mention that he thinks utilities should charge for comfort. So it's a stable billing platform, and that puts the onus on the utility, the cooperative, to actually make the investments to help that consumer save energy, be comfortable, be cool or warm, whatever the nature is. So, I mean, it's possible we see business models like that happen in the future. I'm not concerned for co-ops themselves because I think they're innovative and they can grow to those types of different models. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the very beginning of our industry, we charged members, customers for exactly that. Illumination is what folks were paying for. They weren't paying for kilowatt hour sales. They were paying for illumination. So they were actually paying for a service as opposed to the actual electrons. And I think what we've seen in other industries, looking at the telecommunications industry, for instance, is this move from paying for minutes, during the day or at night or weekends, to a model that's really subscription-based and is based on service and what someone can do with data during a given month. It's not going down to the how many minutes. So I think that model is very likely to make its way into the electric utility industry. And I think stepping back a little bit, I think looking at the future in the next 5-10 years, one thing is still going to be very constant, and that's the focus on safe, affordable, reliable power. I think, reliability overall, people are still going to want the lights on, right? They're still going to want their cold beer, their hot showers. So focus on that. Agreed with everything that Peter said, and as much as I'd like to disagree with this guy,
he definitely nailed 4 things that I intended to talk about.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
But agreed with all that within the larger picture of let's focus on safety, affordability, and reliability.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to add on one more piece there that sustainability. I think that's going to be just an arm of what we've always talked about, because that becomes a reality of what our everyday looks like. And I do want to go back to something you talked about, which is interesting. So if you think of our model, what we refer to as the kilowatt hour model, first of all, that's one of the biggest mistakes we ever did, to push the consumer to think of a kilowatt hour. They have no concept of what that means.
They still don't understand.
They still
the
don't
bill.
understand it,
Yeah.
right? But yet we've constantly pushed that as a way we do business, right? But if you really think of it, think of this: we have a model where we sell people a commodity, a kilowatt hour. Sometimes we tell them, please do not use it. Or even sometimes we pay them not to use it. Would a soft drink company exist if they told people do not buy the soft drink, right? So maybe, what is the soft drink company doing? They're selling comfort to someone. They're selling something that gives them a quality of life that they're looking for. Isn't that what cooperatives were formed?
Yeah.
To improve the quality of life.
Works with the business model.
It's the business model,
Yep.
right? And so I truly believe as we get into this business model conversation, it is important, and I will die on this hill to say, if you're still thinking a kilowatt hour, I think you're in the wrong mindset. I think every cooperative needs to begin to position themselves as saying, what service am I providing? And really beginning to engage their consumers, because now consumers are going to be looking for the service. You talked about a cold beer, right, and a hot shower. The reality of it is, someone works from home 100%. They need to know that power is on, because if they lose power, they also probably lose internet, and it cascades, and now all of a sudden business is disrupted. The small business owner who's actually working from home, the number of employees at Rappahannock, we have a whole hybrid model. I have employees in the state of Georgia, in the state of Texas, Pennsylvania. Imagine if they could not do their job because they didn't have power, right? So it's going back to that service, and I'll go back to quality of service will also become a thing, because someone will say, just like someone says, I'll pay a higher premium for my insurance because I want this level of comfort, there are people who will say, I want to pay this, and we have to ask ourselves, what do our consumers want?
There are co-ops who have done programs where it was a guaranteed monthly bill, so to speak. Arkansas, back in the day, they used to have what was called a Doug Rye home, and if it was built to a certain energy efficiency standard, they would guarantee the bill not to exceed, as I recall. I presume they may still have a few of those Doug Rye homes out there. So it can be done, and with technology and controls, I think it definitely is potential for the future.
Yeah, and I think one key point that Peter mentioned was providing a service or comfort, so to speak, for each co-op. And I think that's the key point right there. So when we talk about the future, there may not be one future for every single co-op. There's around 900 co-ops around the country, each facing different types of state policies, member demographics. Every single co-op really does have a unique set of circumstances, and defining what works for that community is really up to the co-op.
Well, I finally found something I could disagree with you on. I do think there's one common feature that's going to exist throughout every co-op, and that's the consumer and the demand from the consumer. And I think that's the part we have to understand. The consumer is moving as fast as the rate of change of technology. So consumers, I mean, let's call it like it is. If you give a 4-year-old an iPad, they probably know how to use it way better than the three of us.
Yeah, my kids taught me technology, no doubt about it.
And that's so the consumer, to me, and the trend in how the consumer is continues to adopt technology. That's going to be the one common thing that's amongst every cooperative that they have to deal with. But to your point, then each of them have to find their own for their community. But I had to find something to disagree with.
I understand.
But let's talk about the consumer, because it is central to the co-op business model, the member at the end of the line. In the future, what do you envision as far as how will we engage members differently at the end of the line? You thinking about where technology will be 15 years from now?
Well, I think above all, I think we're going to have a more segmented approach to how we engage with members. That's already starting to change, where we may have different types of communication strategies targeting specific groups of members. You have some members who are going to be very engaged and may have more of a sustainability bent, or are interested in higher levels of reliability or resiliency. Those types of members may necessitate co-ops to provide new services to meet those needs. Other consumers may have other needs. So it really does depend on the co-op, going back to that.
I will say, one thing, and if anyone has had a chance, and I think they're still piloting this, and at the Detroit airport, they put this thing where as you walk through it, you saw the display above it, and it showed your specific flight, on what gate, and how long it's going to get you to go there. But someone else is walking next to me who they'll see their own thing. Now, the airlines are already thinking, how do I get directly to that one consumer and give them what they want? That's how we have to position ourselves in terms of how do we provide, how do we engage? Because guess what? The next generation who's going to pay electric bills looks more and more complex, right? And they may interact with one kind of platform in a certain way. Someone else might interact, and the reality of it is, at the end of the day, how do you find and how do you adapt and how do you get the technologies that do drive that engagement? But I do believe that we will be forced to have to find different pathways of having to engage the consumers. The reality of it is, do you deal with the innovators or do you deal with the laggards? Whichever way you look at that curve, you have to ask yourself, how do you find the most optimal thing? But knowing that one solution is not going to fit all.
That's right. You're going to have to deal with the variety of consumers at the end of the line in the way they want to be dealt with.
But the reality of it is, we have to think of ourselves. I know everyone thinks, wow, that's futuristic that, Delta Airlines is piloting this thing at the Detroit airport. If it's out there today, that's not futuristic anymore.
Yeah.
It's here. And so what we think today as is futuristic, we may want to begin to ask ourselves, what is it really futuristic, or is it actually the reality? And the question is, how quickly will we adapt? And the problem is, sometimes we've taken a long time to accept that this is reality versus future. And so when we look at some of those technologies, we're saying, it's going to be a while. And then all of a sudden, the acceleration happens extremely fast.
That's right.
We saw the same thing. Let's take a look at, 10, 15 years ago. We look at solar, right? Solar was the thing that, that's going to be a thing of the future. It's going to be, the reality of it is, and I could say for Rappahannock and how we've positioned ourselves, we actually think, we're safe, reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy solutions. That's really what we're delivering to our members, right? But at the end of the day, we're saying, for example, we want to push every member to get solar as much as they can. Put a battery in your house, and because the reality of it is, we know as we see the growth that's happening in terms of electrification, we're going to need it all, right? And so the thing that looked like futuristic, and even today some people are not as quick to adopt, may be the thing that actually saves us. And so that's how I look at technology.
I'll steal a line from Tim Sullivan, who's friends with all of us. He pointed out that in the future, co-ops will be more aligned as a technology company than an industrial company, a manufacturing entity. And it's so true. I think that they will literally be technology companies, and need to leverage technology routinely every day to engage their members, deliver power efficiently. Well, let me pick one more topic that Peter brought up, and then we'll wrap up with that. And I consider it probably the most critical topic for the future, and that is the talent game. And I know co-ops are moving forward and recruiting different types of talent, but they're also struggling to find the right people to do things like data analytics and things like that, and also meet the price demands for the few people that are out there. So let's discuss what talent is needed in the future, and it could be way out in the future, and then, how do co-ops do that? And I know, Peter, you've actually helped develop some internal talent at Rappahannock, which is pretty phenomenal. I've met some of these people, and they're impressive folks, and they've learned on the job, basically. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I'm proud to say we may be the only utility, and I don't want to say we are, but we may be the only utility that has someone who, a 10-year line worker, transitioned to becoming a data analyst.
Wow.
And you got to think about why that's critical, right? Because now they could do their job as a data analyst from the mindset of a line worker, and they understand exactly what happens in the field, right? If you ask someone, how would that happen? It's unbelievable. That's not the case. And that's kind of where we think where the talent of the future exists. Now, the reality of it is, and unfortunately, the challenges, especially on things like engineering, exist. It's just the reality of it. Power systems engineers we're not producing as many of them as we used to. And then when we produce them, Amazon or Google or someone else pays them way more than we can afford to pay them as a project manager. And I can tell you, if I'm a 22-year-old and I'm being told I'm giving an offer for $165,000, and you're telling me you're going to pay me $75,000, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to go for the $165,000, right? And so we're going to have those challenges from the engineering side. Where we have to position ourselves is, how do we become innovative? And the reality of it is, in some ways, we're our own worst enemy, right? In a good way, we've facilitated and enabled things such as broadband. At the same time, the people that we've had have now other opportunities. They can compete to work from home for a company out in California, Montana, and everything, other states. So now I've already created an environment which is great for the community, but all of a sudden now my talent can easily be pulled anywhere else. So we have to find ways to be flexible in terms of how we recruit our talent. Yep. And flexibility is going to have to be the name of the game if you look at the future the future type of talent you're going to look for. And really this is where, for example, someone asked me, why did you guys create an IT company? I said, because the reality of it is, I know on the cybersecurity side of it, for me to feel comfortable and sleep well, and I can tell you in my first year, I did not sleep well thinking what could happen until I built a team. But I said, well, if I need 3 people, today at Rappahannock, we have our cyber managed 24/7 with a 5-minute or less response. So if at 3 o'clock in the morning, which sometimes I wake up, or many times I wake up in the middle of the night, and I look at something, I said, this looks suspicious, and I send it to our cyber team, I'm getting a response in about 60 seconds that they're looking at it. But guess what? If I have the team that's already positioned like this, can they be the team that helps another cooperative, right? And that's how we position creating this entity, thinking of just the same way as a GNT model, right? Because the reality of it is a 20,000 member co-op will find it extremely hard to hire a cyber information security officer.
Right.
That's an expensive talent.
It is.
I can hire that, and I can resource that to other folks, right? And that's some of the innovation we have to think about in terms of
collaborating cooperatives.
But the reality of it is, but beyond that, is you have to be flexible. You have to have, the reality of it is, if you're positioning yourself that everyone has to be in the office all the time, I'm sorry, you're not going to get the talents that you're looking for. Today, we've been able to recruit folks who came from companies such as Microsoft and Google and everything else, who actually really like what the cooperative model does.
The cooperative model is popular.
It's very popular,
you just gotta
especially
get them in the door.
with the younger generation.
Yeah,
it's very popular. So now all of a sudden, they could go from that. They could, as I said a little bit earlier, I've got folks who live in different states. They get to do their job. I've got a guy in Texas, and he is a certified, in fact, we have 3 certified ethical hackers. His job is to try to hack our system to see what other hackers are doing, right? And that's what he's doing. And he loves the job. He loves the model that we're doing. I have to create that flexibility for him. I have to create an environment where they still feel like they're part of the company, and yet at the same time recognizing that, we hired a guy who, when you look at crowdsourcing on Waze and, when it tells you if there's, an accident or police or anything, one of the people who created that algorithm works for us.
Oh, wow.
You
He
know-
saved me a few speeding tickets.
I'm sure that's the
Yeah.
case. But if you think of it, there's no way a traditional co-op would easily be able to recruit that kind of talent if you didn't create the ecosystem, the system of systems that really provides you with the capability to find the solution that can recruit all over.
So 10, 15 years from now, what job roles will co-ops be recruiting for?
I think anything to do with data will be a hot topic. It already is. That's going to be a hot topic. I think every department, be it finance, someone's going to have to know a little bit on data and
Yep.
data analytics.
Yep.
So that's going to be some of the strength, and that's the resumes that we're going to see over and over again.
Certainly.
I can tell you right now, I still believe, for example, even our member services reps will have to understand something a little bit about algorithms.
Oh, our digital strategy here at CFC has pushed that capability through every department.
And
Every person ultimately grows their capability. Yeah.
So I think I think data, I would call that the number one thing. The number two, when I look at electric cooperatives, I think when I think of their number of devices, especially at the end of the line and behind the meter, people with expertise on understanding those devices and understanding how you manage those devices and understanding those devices even in the home. I like to joke, and people look at me like I'm crazy. Today, for example, if you came into my place, I can open the door for you. I can turn on my stove. I can cool the freezer a little bit. I can make some ice. I can do it all from my phone, right? You're going to need people who understand all those things to be able to actually help the cooperative, because at some point, the members look to us to say, well, you're the energy people, you should know this.
That's right.
And if we don't position ourselves from that perspective, and at the end of the day, I keep saying one thing, and this is a challenge to every cooperative. If you don't try to live what the members are doing, I truly believe every cooperative at this point should at least have one electric vehicle. I truly believe we've installed several batteries, within our buildings. We've got, chargers in all our buildings, several chargers, right? If you're not living that life and understanding what the members are doing and making sure all your staff, it's great, because the moment we began installing chargers at our offices, guess what? I just saw a new electric vehicle, in the parking lot the other day, and so now all of a sudden the employees, by the way, your employees are also your members most of the time.
Yep.
They see you living the life, and all of a sudden you're getting there. So when I think of those jobs, those are the key areas that I think data and what I would call technology and technology strategists are going to be some of the most critical jobs. I still think we're going to need the basic engineering is not going to go away. To
Yep.
Leon's point, there's some things that, let's not lie to ourselves. We're going to need some of this, baseload generation. It is still going to exist, and baseload could be at some point is that large wind turbine with a very large battery. It might mimic what baseload looks like, because now you can address intermittency, right? But those systems will still exist. Transmission will still exist. We're still going to need those jobs. But I think there's a piece of it that we're not spending the time. And today, if you're not going to your high schools, if you're not going to your middle schools, talking to them about these technologies, we'll have a
Building
problem.
new people too.
That's what
Building
we
new
have to do.
people.
And just to add on that, I agree with all that 100%. I think another skill set is finding people that have an understanding of the entire, how everything works together. So they're not necessarily just specialists in a certain field. And you brought this up earlier, where the CFO needs to understand engineering, and engineer has to understand some finance and so forth. But having folks with a broad skill set, a broad understanding, is going to be vital. I also don't think you can discount the value of soft skills, the ability to collaborate, the value of being able to speak to your members. You mentioned going out and talking to folks at elementary schools and so forth. Having folks that have people skills, collaboration skills, that really is the future.
I do think, you bring that up, and I kind of hinted to this earlier, we'll not be able to work in a silo anymore. So collaboration is going to be the key. I'll give, when we did several studies this year, for example, aging infrastructure and looking at transformer loading for electric vehicles, if I say those things traditionally, what you think is those were ran under engineering. Actually, those were ran from my data analytics team with engineering and finance and other folks involved.
Yep.
That's where we have to think a little bit different. In fact, what we call our long-range planning, our engineering work plans, our financial planning, will have to start looking very different, and that's where collaborating and bringing people with expertise, with knowledge of systems is where it's going to really become critical.
Well, gents, fascinating conversation. We kind of moved through a lot of different topics. I think we could talk for the entire day on it, and hopefully we'll have more sessions where we can continue the discussion, get other people involved too. So I thank you for joining CFC and having the discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.